Hello. Welcome to my channel Touching Stories. You're about to hear an amazing story about love and unexpected decisions. Enjoy watching. Don't ever do that again, Andrew said, taking her by the waist and pulling her off the table. Jane managed to get a firm grip on her neck. I don't mind going on, but it's work day. At any moment, a phone call could come in or they could come in. Irritation was building. He hastily cleaned himself up. He almost always hated himself after intimacy with her. How could he resist her? Come on. I even closed the door to the waiting room. There's no one in the office. When you buy me a cozy little apartment, we'll meet only there. But don't you like variety? Go to work. And don't forget that you're a secretary first and foremost. He waved a hand and added, I do, of course. Jane turned around in the doorway, smiling triumphantly. When had she turned into the one he couldn't be without anymore? Yes, from the first time. One day, reading the news in the feed, the guy stumbled across an ad which he first took as a joke. Secretary plus intimacy. The head of the company is always stressed, chronically tired. The working day is irregular. It is important to relax regularly, and the best way out of this situation. Beautiful secretary at his side. He filled out the form, and then he got a call back, promising to send an experienced secretary, ready to provide additional services at any time. They reassured him that this was a legitimate business. Everything was formalized by contracts, and the risks were calculated. The girls entered into a relationship with their manager at their own will. There was a vacancy in the office at the time, and he thought, what the hell? Indeed, he worked without days off, practically living on the job. His wife worked hard at hers, too, and neither of them had time to fulfill their spousal duties when they finally crossed paths. And the word duty itself turns away from this occupation, and the desire for it sometimes arises. And what is wrong with a close relationship between a manager and an employee, if they are sympathetic to each other? Andrew consoled himself. The thing is that he did not cheat on his wife, and then such a sharp turn. In the evening, an employee of the firm brought the contract. It was all in good order, with clauses stipulating various contingencies and signatures. Then she came in. Andrew was amazed at how much the girl matched his ideal of feminine beauty. Tall, slender, with loose blonde hair, noticeable and attractive hips covered by a narrow, elongated skirt. She entered the office and he felt dizzy as he imagined burying his face in that gorgeous hair. The folder of papers fell out of his hands. I'll give you a hand. The girl quickly walked over to the table, squatted down, and began picking up the fallen sheets. He lowered himself beside her, and his lips touched her delicate cheek. The smell was Armani. Just a minute, I have to close the door. It had been a long time since he'd felt such intense desire, but the experienced seductress skillfully guided the process. Compared to her, he was a dilettante, but he also longed for carnal pleasure. The body did not let him down. He never imagined that after what happened, he would be 20 years younger, stop sleeping with his wife, and that during the day would think of his secretary and was waiting for her to come into his office in the evening. Her name was Jane. The owner of the fancy dress store had just received the accountant's report. The woman was drinking her tea and thinking not about the proceeds and the parcels of merchandise, but about her life with her husband, which had noticeably fractured. 7 years ago, their son Nathan had died. He was 20 years old. He and Andrew were away at work at the time. Things were just getting better, and the titanic efforts to grow the business were beginning to generate a decent income. The kids were on the back burner. Their parents were paying them off with money. Nathan knew no limits at all. He was presented with a sports car. No one he knew had a car like that. His peers, of course, were jealous. Racing did not seem enough to him. He got hooked on card games and mostly lost. When the requests for sponsorship became especially numerous, his parents flipped out, stopped giving him money, and the boy was just put on the meter. On the eve of the tragedy, he went to his mother and asked for $3,000. She yelled at him, said she wouldn't give him a dime, and that it was high time he earned his own money, as he and his father had done at his age. Mom, but you and Dad are saving everything for us anyway. You said yourself, so give me some of your future inheritance, but I really need it. Believe me. What exactly do you need it for? Of course I didn't tell you. If he had admitted that he had debts, that he was threatened, of course I would have given him money. But here I sent him away. That's what my father did. They told each other that they did the right thing. It was time to wean the children off handouts. In the morning, the father's friend called, said their son was gone. The tough guys beat him for not bringing money. And then he got in his car and crashed into an asphalt roller standing on the side of the road, outside of town, maybe even on purpose. She and her husband almost went crazy while they were busy with the funeral, supporting each other, and then they could not bear the weight of their guilt. They began to live on their own, talking less, irritated on various trifles, and in general rarely met. They continued to exist under one roof, but as neighbors. They did not go anywhere together for a long time. They did not go to the theater. They tried to refuse social events, and the business lost its appeal. They still worked hard, but without enthusiasm. Of course, this is all wrong, we thought Helen. After all, we're husband and wife. And Alice started saying that I was turning into an aunt. And Alice started saying that I was turning into an aunt, that I wasn't taking care of myself, that it was unpleasant to look at me. She's gone completely wild too. I wish I hadn't lost her like Nathan. My musings were interrupted by a phone call. Helen, hello. This is the Central Police Station. You need to come to the station. Your daughter Alice is detained. A lawyer is required. Come while you. The woman listened to the tirade silently, almost calmly, as if she expected something like this. She and her husband had been clutching their heads at their daughter's antics lately. The last time she had broken a policeman's nose. They were told that the girl had been detained for obstructing the lawful actions of a law enforcement officer. It turned out that she had stood up for her grandmother. She was selling some junk in the subway, and the policeman began to push her from behind the improvised counter. Alice saw and went into battle for justice, but in an original way. She hit the policeman in the face with her purse, and his nose bled. This is just one example. There were other feats. Parents did not recognize their once exemplary and infinitely loving daughter. The girl has become harsh, irritable, unbalanced, constantly sassed them both, and expressed some crazy ideas. Got a stupid tattoo, dyed her hair maroon, and argue. Parents did not realize that their daughter felt better than them the approaching collapse of the family, and she categorically did not want it and was afraid, so she appealed for help in this way, hoping to unite her father and mother in the fight against themselves, to help them return to their former selves. And by that time, when everyone in the family was warm, cozy, and comfortable, the mother did not know, and the father understood why it was lately that the daughter seemed to have gone mad. One day, as he and Jane were leaving the hotel happy after spending time together, they literally ran into Alice. "Daddy," the daughter exclaimed in surprise. "Who's that?" He mumbled something unintelligible, but Alice knew it was her lover. The blonde beauty seemed to fit her idea of an easygoing girl. Andrew saw a picture of his wife on the screen of his iPhone. "Listen, Alice is at the police station. Go talk to her again." "That's it. My patience has run out." He almost threw the phone on the table. "I promised her I'd get her a job at the factory if she wouldn't settle down, and I will, and don't you mind?" And my wife didn't mind because she knew she really had to do something. Andrew quickly reached an agreement with the police department, and they did not draw up a protocol. They knew him well and did not want to quarrel. And frankly, the occasion was not criminal. It was a crazy girl who had painted the windows of the cafe early in the morning, where she had been kicked out the day before for violent behavior. Some of the regulars reported her to the precinct. Her father did not mince words and demanded that she take public transportation to the factory the next morning and get a job on her own without giving herself away. If there were any questions, you were the director's namesake. Alice became angry and finally decided that she would go to work, but that she would now live separately from her parents. In the apartment she had been given as a present when she came of age, her father left, and she wandered aimlessly down the street with her head down and almost crying. A boy walking toward her wearing headphones and with a phone in his hand was looking for something and literally ran into her, and to keep her from falling, grabbed her by the shoulders tightly, pressed her to him. She looked at him, and he at her, and suddenly both felt that this was not a chance encounter. No, of course they were seeing each other for the first time, but it felt as if they had met before, and something between them had been, or would be. They say there can be a connection between people that science can't explain. A cosmic connection or a connection to a past life. The two will not necessarily be in love. Perhaps they will become best friends or are meant to teach each other something. Excuse me, please, I'm so awkward. Are you all right? Let's sit down. Here's a bench. Take your time. My name is Philip. Haven't we met before? The guy wouldn't stop talking. No, I don't think we have. I'm Alice. She smiled at last. She felt very comfortable around this handsome, athletic, stylish guy. You look so sad. Did someone hurt you? Tell me, I'll take care of it. By the way, I do karate. You shouldn't be afraid of me. No one hurt me. Just problems with my parents. She was surprised at herself and began to tell him, a stranger who turned out to be her family, how she felt about her parents' estrangement. They loved each other so much. They were always together. My father used to carry my mother's poems in his arms and write them. And recently I saw him with his mistress. Why does he need her? He's an old man. He'll be 50 soon. She's young. She'll cheat on him, take money from him. He asked me not to tell my mother about the meeting, because she'd be worried and everything, as if she wasn't already worried. You can't hide it, she reasoned childishly. Well, I don't have a mother. I never saw her. Is she dead? No, she's alive. My father said she went to Germany long ago, got married there. She probably doesn't remember me. She gave birth to me in high school. She wasn't 18. Then it's understandable. She didn't have time to love you. But my father did. They were classmates. They got up a long time ago and strolled around the nearest park. Philip told me that his parents hadn't thought about getting married, nor had they thought about having a baby. But it turned out the way it did. When the mother gave birth, she simply brought her son to his father, a child like herself, and left him. His parents, who were doctors, had gone to Africa to work. If it hadn't been for my grandmother, I'm afraid he would have sent me to an orphanage. My grandmother raised me and kept telling my father that he was responsible for me, that I was his blood and everything, and that's why he should spend as much time with me as possible. Then she used to convince me of that too. Alice listened intently. She was terribly interested in everything the funny guy was saying. My father is a good man, he studied. Worked with me, studied. I love him very much. Grandma died a long time ago, but I think she's watching me now and giving me hints in life. For example, today, I was waiting for some important event. And then I met you. You should be grateful to your mother, suddenly Alice said. For what? For what? For my life. She could have got rid of you when she was pregnant. No one would have known. And she carried you for 9 months, then had more babies. You're right, of course, but I still don't feel grateful. And your father never got married? No, he's a confirmed bachelor. There's probably a woman. I didn't ask him about it, but he hasn't brought anyone into the house. He doesn't want to traumatize me, and I, on the contrary, would like to find a good woman to match him. Beautiful, intelligent, his age. He is 40, by the way. I won't be with him all my life. I will have a family of my own. The young people talked for a long time and started dating. Philip seemed to fall in love immediately and irrevocably. Alice was also interested in the young man, realizing that they were alike in many ways. They listened to the same music, visited the same bloggers, looked at many things in the same way. But if she had been asked if she loved her new acquaintance, she would have said no. Jane wondered, what do these men want? She'd spent a year on one, and all she got from him was jewelry, expensive jewelry, and a car. No dividends. She had read somewhere that Elvis Presley gave cars to whomever he could. Once, when she was buying another one, a groupie came up to him just to say hello to her idol. She praised the purchase, and the singer gave her the same car. She said without a second thought that his gift was the best thing she ever got for her birthday, and it was yesterday, and Elvis gave her a lot of money for a dress that matched the new car. Boy, are there men like that in the world. And she had to beg for a long time to have a brand new Opal under the window of her rented apartment on the day of her birthday. Gratitude from her side was long, inventive, and he does not want to part with his old wife. What did he see in her? Mother was right. Thought it was easier for a mistress. You don't have to fixate on one man. You have to change them as their resources are depleted. Jane remembered that she had recently been told about Sergio, the successful banker, millionaire, handsome, and bachelor. Do we have to take it, Dee? Decided the millionaire hunter. My current lover isn't going anywhere. I'll be begging him for an apartment, and there might be a different kind of support figures here. And even, why not? I might finally get a husband. Her mother was a beauty, served in the theater. Strangers learning about it were sure that the woman was an actress, but she worked as a costume designer. Many male actors lingered in her studio much longer than required fitting, and she did not refuse anyone. She was greedy for a relationship. She did not offend her husband either. She was sure that he was satisfied with his life with her. Of course, such a woman around, but he left her for someone else. She wept, not because he left. It was a small loss, but because he was stolen by an unattractive gray mouse, almost a librarian. As I say, not at the drop of beauty. On perplexing questions from friends, ex-husband said he was tired of life on a volcano. His wife's tantrums, her complaints, thoughts of a permanent betrayal. With a new girlfriend, he felt important, the only and irreplaceable. His wife quickly recovered from the shock and did not grieve in the slightest. She was sure that she would immediately be remarried. And no, as a mistress, please, and even very persistently, but married. Sorry, no. Then she quickly revised her life plans and decided that with her luxurious body and extensive experience of seduction, she should switch to a wealthy man, take everything from her lover, and if she could not become a mistress of the house, leave without waiting for him to do it himself. Thank God there are still a lot of men in this country. While looking for a millionaire, content with less rich partners, bringing them home, not the least bit embarrassed by the presence of his daughter nearby. The girl witnessed her mother's love affairs from the age of 12. As soon as her father left home, her daughter understood that her men were of no value to her mother. And as Jane came of age, hurried to send her to the capital, not caring at all that the girl has no education and no skills whatsoever. In the capital, she met a guy who took her in for support. He was married with 2 children and told her lover at once that he had a family. He did not abandon his own, but he did not spare money on her. He paid for her education at the university. When he went abroad with his family, he brought his former concubine to the recruitment agency that recruited rich men. The experience she had gained over time allowed Jane to quickly become one of the firm's best employees. And now, she had to use all her skills to catch the big fish, a banker, a millionaire. She thought of everything to the smallest detail. We'll portray a modest, austere, but not stupid. She dressed stylishly. Her makeup is barely visible. Her knees are covered. She unbuttoned only one button on her shirt. Her perfume is expensive, but not edgy. She took the highest-heeled shoes, filed one off, and went hunting. She studied Sergio's schedule and knew he was going to the restaurant for lunch at 1:30. She waited for him to start the car and drive off, and with the phone in her hand from the billboard behind which she lurked, stepped onto the road, wrapped her arms around the hood, and helped her heel brake. He didn't seem to notice her right away. It needed to. The brake squealed. The banker jumped out of the car, rushing toward her. "Oh, my God, girl, where did you come from?" She was able to play scared and at the same time show her advantageous side. Disheveled hair knocked down to the side skirt, revealing a beautiful knees, and a shoe with a broken heel made the right impression. The man took her under his arm and opened the door. "Sit down. We'll fix it in a moment." Jane smiled shyly. Sergio drove to the nearest fancy shoe boutique and bought the shoes, she pointed out. "I invite you to the restaurant. It's just about lunchtime. Would you say no?" The huntress inwardly applauded herself. The affair quickly swirled. Jane surpassed herself in the relationship that began, she realized. Here, impudent and one bed is not enough, so she tried to be for him, to be different. Each time she surprised him with a change of image and behavior, interested in his affairs, but not intrusive, and always looked stunning. On one date she was quiet and submissive, and on another she surprised him with her eccentricity. She needed to give the impression of a decent girl, since she aimed for marriage, but on the eroticism, and she blundered. At first, she tried to seem inexperienced in bed, but quickly began to behave actively, and most importantly, to show her skills. Of course, the 40-year-old bachelor knew representatives of the first oldest profession, and soon recognized one in his new acquaintance. It became clear that one would have to forget about a serious relationship with a stamp in the passport and control of her husband's money. Alice got involved in the factory. Those who knew she was the director's daughter turned their fingers to their heads, but the rest of us paid no attention to her last name. Many young girls had dyed hair and tattoos, and some not so young. She met her standards. She did not smoke during her shift, and when her friends asked, she gladly helped them. Quickly she was awarded a grade, and a couple of months later, she was promoted to foreman. Her charges did not grumble and said, "She is a fair girl and will not offend us." My father was in the shop only once. He inquired about the work in the brigade and whether she had any remarks to make to the management. The foreman listed all the wishes of the team, and the director promised to consider, and if possible to solve, shook her hand and left. Closer than the others, Alice communicated with Victoria, a pretty girl who had recently arrived from the village. Alice had never known the villagers. She just hadn't had the chance. If she were asked what the youth of the villages are like, she would voice the stereotypes. They can't dress. They are rude, uneducated. She would never say that she was a village girl. Her natural beauty was not spoiled by makeup. Always with a kind smile on her face, a respectful attitude to her older workmates, communicated with everyone warmly and openly, dressed fashionably, but not garishly. Victoria was not interested in young men. Or rather, she was interested in one, but she did not even know his name. Her one chance encounter was her last. She could not forget him. Last summer, she had come to the open day at the Institute. She loved everything about it. She listened passionately to the professors, looked at the auditorium and the hall, imagined herself as a student. There were so many impressions that she, once again, going out into the hallway, forgot her purse in the auditorium. When she grabbed it and returned, the purse was still there, but the wallet was not in it. Victoria was desperate. No one she knew in town and no money for a return ticket, she cried. Guys and girls passed by indifferently, and one stopped. Is there anything I can do to help? The voice was very pleasant, and the question sounded off-duty. Here, my purse is gone. The girl could not cope with tears. I need to go home. How much is the ticket? Victoria, out of the corner of her eye, saw a handsome, tall, brown-haired man with a fashionable haircut, well-dressed, and named the amount. That's all. Is that worth crying over? Here, take it. He handed her the bill. Be more careful on the open day. Be more careful on the open day. It's not just applicants walking around. How am I going to pay back my debt? When you get into the institute, I'll find you and demand my trip. They shouted at him. He waved his hand at the company and turned to the girl again. Never cry over nothing. Victoria stood at a loss with the bill in her hand. What did they call him? She could not remember what beautiful and kind eyes he had, and her voice would have listened and listened. What was it? Love at first sight or a feeling of gratitude? She did not explain to herself, but she thought of the boy and often imagined how she would find him, give him the money, what words she would say, and what he would answer her. She told no one about the incident, not even Alice. With her they talked about literature. The new acquaintance's reading was a surprise to her friend. Victoria always carried a book in her purse, and when she had free time she read. One could ask her any question about literature, and she would immediately answer it. She had a phone too, of course, and not a bad one, but only for calls. She did not sit on social networks, did not recognize bloggers, and ignored toys. It turned out that after school she could not apply to the institute. Her mother fell ill, and all the trouble of home and caring for her fell on her. A year was lost, but she was determined to get a place in college. Her grades were high. She has to get in, and she confesses that she wants to be a fashion designer. Even as a child, parents and teachers noticed the girl's ability to draw. A teacher, a district architect, was also found. With pleasure she told and showed the infatuated girl how to get her hand. She even offered to enter the Architectural and Construction Institute, which she had graduated from, but she chose a different direction. For a long time, she had been modeling and sewing her own clothes, first for her dolls, and then for herself and her friends. Later, young socialite fashionistas began to turn to her. The townspeople still think that women in the countryside walk exclusively in jackets and rubber boots. In fact, with the current level of openness of information, the difference is not in the place of residence, but in a developed or completely absent sense of taste. The shift was over. The girls came out of the gatehouse. Victoria, didn't you forget about my order? Philip's birthday party is just around the corner. He's invited me to the restaurant. We have to look our best. He asked me to marry him. We're going to meet my father the other day. Alice suddenly frowned. I don't know what to do. I'm not happy with our relationship. I'm afraid of making a mistake. Afraid of what exactly? Do you love your boyfriend? That's the thing I don't know. I'm sure Philip is nice and loves me. He's my best friend. Sometimes I think he's a lot like my brother. Remember I told you, I can talk to Philip like a brother about everything. But that's not love. In my opinion, if you're not in love, you shouldn't mess with a person's head. And if it's love, then you're sure to feel it. And the outfit is ready, and the dress and the jewelry. Let's go to my place and try it on and see how it looks. Hello, beauties. Philip stood in front of them. Victoria recognized the very same man, and for some far-fetched reason, she left in a hurry. What a strange friend you have. No, she's great. She must be tired. It was a hard shift. Philip put his arm around his sweetheart. Let's go to the cafe. I was starving. I had 3 couples. What about you? Me, too. They sat at a table talking. This time Phil bragged about buying tickets to the concert. The boy knew that Alice did not miss new performances of the band either. In the evening, Philip got a call from an acquaintance. I saw you with a girl today. You look at her with amorous eyes. I want to warn you, she's a regular at the police station around here. Yeah, she's been busted a few times. I'm told she broke one officer's nose in the line of duty. So you be careful with her. I don't know her background, but isn't she trying to cheat you out of your money? The boy sent him away but thought about it. What did he really know about her? Who are her parents? Where does she live? They had been dating for 6 months. In that time, she had never invited him to her house. Never told him why she was working in a factory and not studying. Son, I'm home. My father came home. Over dinner, my son told me about the phone call and the doubts he had about his girlfriend. Dad, I want to check her out. What if she really only wants my money and she doesn't really love me? Well, I don't feel much tenderness on her part. She's kind of closed off. What was I thinking? I was like, you should work as an actor, dress up as a tramp and ask her for something. You can even ask her to stay overnight. How is she going to behave when she has to give a stranger money, or do a favor for a stranger money, or do a favor for a stranger? What do you say? I say, son, that you don't like the girl much yourself if you don't trust her and make trials. But of course, I wouldn't want my son to fall for a cheater or a bitch. Let's give it a try. The next day, which was a Saturday, Phil arranged for Alice to meet her at the park. And when she was already there, he called and rescheduled the date. Sergio, dressed in clothes bought at a nearby flea market, unshaven and wearing a wig borrowed from an acquaintance, came out to meet her. The girl suspected nothing, and when the stranger, apologizing at length, asked her for some money for bread, explaining that he had not eaten for 3 days, she said, "Let's go into a cafe. I'll order you lunch, but I'm sorry. I won't give you any money. I don't want you to use it for booze." The homeless man agreed. They sat down at a table. Alice ordered and paid for several dishes and wanted to leave. The stranger asked for a few more minutes of his attention. Alice had nowhere to go, so she got herself a coffee. Don't think I was always a beggar. I used to work as a chief accountant at a big firm. The owner set me up and I had to go to jail for it. Came back, no job, no family, no apartment. Alice said she knew the address of a social shelter that would help him and gave him money for the trip. The homeless man thanked her for a long time. That was the end of the story. The girl was surprised at herself. A stranger, a middle-aged lumpen, and she fell in love with him. But yes, for all his outward signs, the bum looked dignified. He spoke respectfully and had an intelligent look. It was his eyes that were the most memorable. Intelligent, shrewd, gray eyes, attentive, not ingratiating, looking at the benefactor. The face kept her awake. Alice was afraid to admit to herself that she had fallen in love. And in the evening, when she met Phil, the first thing she did was tell him about her encounter with the stranger. She made no secret of the fact that she liked him, and why, she could not explain. The distraught groom saw her off and rushed off to his father. No, it can't be. They are almost husband and wife, and she falls in love with a bum. Philip was furious, forgetting who the bum was. How was the test? The son turned to his father. Calm down, son. The girl is very nice. You don't have to worry. Kind, sincere, thoughtful, she will not cheat. And she's beautiful. The father strode about the room. His eyes were sad. What else do you say? Nothing. And don't you dare test her anymore. She doesn't deserve it. Then I'll tell you. The boy poured out a torrent of anger and resentment on his father. Sergio stood at a loss. Did she like him? No way. Only now he realized that all the time since breaking up with Alice, he had been thinking about her. She was his son's girlfriend. What the hell? For the first time, he didn't know what to say to his son, so he left for his office. Philip got a bottle of whiskey from the bar and locked himself in his room. Jane had forgotten what she had been taught in a course on seducing married men. Not to be pushy, not to criticize her wife, not to demand a divorce, not to demand a divorce, not to throw showdowns and tantrums, not to ask for gifts. As a careless schoolgirl, she repeated the same mistakes. Here we are, after yet another passionate pastime, starting the old divorce routine. Andrew had never during his relationship with his secretary contemplated leaving the family, never complained to his mistress about his spouse, hanging non-existent sins on her, never shared his worries. Now he listened to the woman lying beside him and thought how quickly mistresses become copies of their wives with their complaints about the husband. Instead of ease, positivity, and peace of mind, a man begins to get on the side of what is enough at home. It's time to end it. Unexpectedly formulated solution brought relief. The apartment will still have to buy. But it was better than having to listen to his moods, his tantrums, his excuses. He drove home and thought of his wife. They had met in early fall at a student party. He came with a classmate with whom he was beginning a romantic relationship and introduced her as his fiancée, to which she laughingly replied that she had not consented. Somehow it happened that they lost their halves and ended up together during the feast. They felt very well and chatted a lot. There were always topics of interest to both of them. A bit taken aback at how similar their views on life were, they left the party, ignoring the big eyes of their classmates and the anger of their friend. All night long, they walked around the city. They met up often. There was no boredom. Freshman. He was a third-year student, almost a graduate by college standards, a grown-up, self-sufficient man. It was a difficult time in the country. The mid-90s, everything around was falling apart and being rebuilt. The young people dreamed of having their own business and tried to go into business. People were saying that learning at that time was a waste of nerves and money, and that no one needed specialists with higher education now anyway. It was better to wash cars, deliver newspapers, or even sell in a pedestrian mall, just to earn something. Andrew became a man, went to Turkey and Greece, brought back sheepskin coats and other things, and many times he was raided by bandits. Usually they took the money, but sometimes the goods too. They didn't rob it completely. Who would cut the hen that lays the golden eggs? My wife helped sell the merchandise they brought, and at the same time they bought up stocks. This later allowed him to participate in the privatization of a textile factory. He focused on it, and the girl succeeded him in business. The romance of their relationship, meanwhile, did not disappear. They found time for excursions to the mountains and visits to informal music concerts. That was how it was then. They listened to rock and went to concerts. Andrew wrote his own poems, played guitar, and dedicated all of his songs to his beloved. They were going through a very unhappy time. Angry because of work, hungry, always in business and worries, but they did not abandon their studies. Full of hope for a wonderful future, they rented a tiny apartment and made repairs together, understood each other without words, never quarreled seriously, and realized that they were perfect for each other. I remembered how the workers at his factory had gone on strike. It was for 2 months without pay, and he had such a force majeure that it was better not to remember. They called him into the shop and started making demands. He tried to explain, but people needed to speak out and punish the culprits, one of whom was now standing in front of them. The crowd raged, fueling itself with shouting. Andrew really felt the end coming, and suddenly, out of nowhere, his wife walked through the crowd toward him. Listen. Her voice was drowned out by the noise, but the presence of a new actor surprised everyone in the meeting. First the front rows fell silent, then the rest. Look, I'm Andrew's wife. Look at me. I'm not wearing a ring or gold earrings. I work in accounting, and we've been without pay for 2 months, too. We have a young son and not enough groceries. I know what my husband is going through. He does not sleep at night. He travels and makes arrangements everywhere. He's being set up by the suppliers. The bank will not give him a loan. We have to be patient a little more. The ministry promised to help. Maybe they believed it, maybe not. But her very appearance and her fierce defense of her husband made an impression. People began to disperse. Who could forget such a thing? And always she supported him, and he supported him, and he supported her. In the 2000s, they opened a small store. It was hard, but they still loved each other. Of course, their son's death took its toll on them. But why, instead of pulling together and becoming doubly stronger, they, on the contrary, broke the previously close bond and became like two ships sailing away from each other, only to drown separately in a sea of problems. "Why? I'm going to fire her today," Andrew said aloud. "I've had enough of the variety she's brought into my life." Alice called her mother. She really needed her advice, and they met at a nearby cafe. What happened? Alice talked about the unexpected meeting with the stranger and the impression he made on her. "You see, I feel that this is a very good person. I can see it in his eyes. I want to meet him again and learn more about his life. I miss him." Helen moved toward her and put her arm around her shoulders. "Sweetheart, my daughter, maybe this is a momentary impulse of pity, a natural desire to help and nothing more. Didn't Philip propose to you? The wedding is just around the corner. How do you feel about it today?" "Oh, I don't love him." "I don't. How long ago did you realize that?" "Yesterday, when I saw a stranger's eyes. They are bottomless and raising them. His gaze made my heart stop for a second, and then it started beating in a different way. I realized that I cared about this man and that I wanted him to be happy." She smiled. "Remember when you told me how you felt when you met your father and knew right away that he was yours? It was the same for me." Jane was walking down the street at this time, saw the man's wife and daughter, walked into the cafe and sat down behind the pillar next to her. "You see, Mom, I feel sorry for Philip. He's a good man. Pity, my daughter, is not the feeling you should have for the one you love. You'll go to the ends of the earth for someone you love without asking why. With him, you won't recognize yourself. With him, you will feel open and under a secure roof. With him, you will feel the happiest woman in the world every minute. If that's not the case with Philip, it's Philip the case with Philip. It's fairer to break up with him now than to keep checking your feelings after the wedding." Jane rubbed her hands together. "Aha, I guess the daughter is determined to break up the wedding, and her mother is setting her up for it. And he probably already sees himself as a close relative of a millionaire. I'll tell him everything, and then I'll feel sorry for the two fools." She'd tried approaching Phil once before, when they'd been in the same company and Sergio had been delayed. That time the youngster had simply run away from her. But all was not yet lost, as Jane thought. She stealthily walked out of the cafe. "Mom, you have changed. You are very young. Well done for taking care of yourself. You are so beautiful." She praised her daughter. Helen was pleased with her daughter's words. She really spent a lot of time and money on herself lately, which in principle was not typical for her. Suddenly, the woman realized she wanted to look attractive, not only stern and determined, but also feminine. Tired of seeing herself in a mirror, sullen, ungroomed grandmother, and remembering how spectacular it was even more recently. "I thought about myself first and then about Andrew. It's never too late to change for the better," was she decided. And indeed she did change. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her head, put on heels, changed her hair color and haircut, bought new things, began to catch the eyes of others. Interested, male, envious, female. Once again she felt beautiful. She wanted to become desirable to her husband. Victoria stood on the porch of the Institute, gazing intently at those who entered. "Excuse me, Phil, may I see you for a moment?" He turned around, recognized the bridesmaid's friend, and walked over. "Hello." She took a bill from her purse and held it out. "Thank you. You helped me out a lot." Seeing on the guy's face that he does not remember the incident, as they say, continued. "Last spring at the open house, right here, my purse was stolen. You gave me the money. I lived in the village. And there was no more in town. So there was no more in town. So there was no way I could pay it back. So it was you, Philip finally remembered. It's nothing. It's nothing. Are you a student here now? Oh, yes. You work in the factory with her. Vera managed to persuade Philip to take the money. The boy was in a disgusting mood. He wanted to talk to someone about what had happened, so he suggested she take a walk. The girl listened interestedly, did not ask or advise anything. She understood that he needed to get it out. The telephone rang. Philip automatically answered, though the number was unfamiliar. It was Jane. Do you remember? I need to talk to you about your fiancé and you. She gave me the address. Philip hurried away. Victoria gently touched him. Don't worry, it will all work out. He drove up to the place indicated by Jane. She got into his car and told him about the conversation, adding from herself the unflattering remarks about him allegedly made by the girl and informing him that she had fallen in love with another man. When Philip stunned her by telling her who her fiancé really suffered for, she did not hesitate to suggest that he steal the girl away, take her to the country, straighten her out, try to bring her down to earth, and play on her nobility. She was mean to you. Why should you play the noble knight? Philip had had too much to drink the night before. His head was pounding, and he wanted more than anything to burrow into his pillow and cry. Jane's words did not seem like nonsense to him. On the contrary, he thought the advice made sense. But how to get Alice to go with him, and where? To the country house was out of the question. They would find them there at once. To the country house of some friend. They would look for everyone they knew, too. He remembered how, in the summer, he and his father had gone to his old friend's house, and he had arranged for them to go hunting. All three of them had gone deep into the woods, where there happened to be a sturdy house. There they spent the night. Everything was arranged in a masterly manner. He remembered the road and decided that no one would find them there for sure until they drove out themselves. He called Alice. Sit down if you are standing. I have some interesting news for you. Remember the tramp you fed and sent to the orphanage? Yes, of course. He's not a bum. He's my father. What are you talking about? Have you been drinking? Yeah. I was drunk last night when I found out. We were checking to see if you were a fraud or a gold digger. We did, didn't we? Well, goodbye, both of you, with your checking. Wait. Don't hang up. My father's worried. Very sorry for me, ashamed in front of you. He's gone to the country house and won't answer the phone. I'm afraid for him. Let's go together and see how he's doing. Do you know how fast he can drive when he's upset? Come on in. Philip popped into the nearest supermarket, bought groceries and plaids, and raced to pick up his girlfriend. Quickly, the boys drove out of town. They drove for a long time along the highway. Then Philip turned off into the woods. The conversation did not stick. He was worried whether his plan would succeed. She wanted and dreaded meeting Philip's father. The car behaved capriciously on the forest road, scooping the bumper at every bump, hitting tree roots, swerving sideways. To top it all off, the front wheels fell into a decent hole, abandoned by branches. Philip drove well in the city, but never on rough terrain, much less off. Rode in the woods. He could not free the car from the trap. Helplessly dropping his hands on his knees, he continued to lie that the house was beyond the woods. Attempts to push the cars out were in vain. And then Alice twisted her ankle, and this unplanned force Major put the guy's brains on edge. He didn't make any more up. He told her what plans he had for her, and apologized for a long time. Look, I love you. I don't want to lose you. She didn't have time to figure things out. Her leg was sore and she was thirsty. Can you walk? Philip worried. There is a hunting lodge not far away. There you can sleep for the night. The girl could barely stand the pain. The boy carried her in his arms most of the way. Soon they arrived in a spacious clearing with a nice wooden house. "What shall we do now?" he asked Alice. "The phones don't work, and no one knows where we are. Perfect for a honeymoon, wouldn't you say?" The girl didn't appreciate the joke. That evening, Helen called her daughter to inquire about her state of mind. She didn't answer. After a while, she repeated the call. Silence again. Her parents didn't have Philip's phone number, but Helen knew the last name. Together with her husband, they went to the bank, met his father. Sergio began calling his son, and also to no avail. They also went to the daughter's apartment, but it was empty. Helen remembered a girl, Vera, with whom the daughter was friends. She wasn't at work either, but the personnel department gave the address of her apartment. The girl was able to clarify something. She told him that in the morning she met Philip at the institute, that he was very upset about his breakup with his fiancée, and that a woman called Jane and offered to meet him. He quickly left, that's all. And what of Alice? Where she is, it is not clear. The men were awakened. Both thought of the same acquaintance, separated themselves, and dialed the same number. Jane answered the banker. "Hello, kitty cat. It's good to hear from you." "Shut up," Sergio interrupted her. "I have a son missing. I'm going crazy. You don't know anything." "How? How?" "A friend told me my son got a call from Jane. Something tells me it was you." "Well, me, don't worry about it. He's away with his girlfriend. A romantic date, you know. Wanted to get away from his parents. Where'd he go? Out of town somewhere, but he lives there." He had no time to find out what the woman had to do with this successful departure. In part, he calmed down and said that he knew his son's friends. It would be easy to find the missing. However, the phone calls did not yield anything. They turned to all their acquaintances from various agencies, but all was in vain until they reached the traffic police. Not immediately, but they found cameras that were also somewhere on the highway. This narrowed the search a lot, but it was still unclear where the car had turned off the highway. However, they realized that the guys were alone. No one had kidnapped them. No one had kidnapped them. No one was following them. Most likely something happened to the car. As always happens, it suddenly became dark quickly in the forest. The further search had to be abandoned. The children's phones were still unavailable, and they were working unsteadily. Sitting in the morning, the search resumed. The banker recalled the forest hut of his hunter friend. It was on the other side of the directions of their search, but they decided to turn around and check it out. After a few kilometers among the trees on a barely visible road, the company saw a car body sticking out of a hole and sighed with relief. But, to their surprise, there were no children in the car. Zlotnikov. They quickly made it the rest of the way. Indeed, in the back of the clearing stood a fairly decent structure. Inside, children were sleeping, wrapped in plaids, with their heads on opposite sides of the bunks. There was food and water on the table. The travelers could have lived there for at least a week, but they were very happy when they opened their eyes when they heard the conversation and saw the uninvited but expected guests. Alice rushed to her mother, then hugged her father. The boys apologized to their parents and said they had learned more about each other in that time than they had in 6 months of knowing each other. Helen and Andrew realized they had experienced the same thing during that sleepless night. Jane got on the train angry, but as always with Parade, the boss fired her. She decided to go to her town, mentally comforting herself with Plutarch's aphorism, "Better to be first in a small town than second in Rome." Now she will prove herself in a place where the competition is not so high. Millionaires aren't the only people in the world. She'll find her own prince. After all, the city is not so small. The regional center, high-ranking officials, including the governor, are a dime a dozen. Train moved. A balding, not the first, young, fat fellow traveler with 2 suitcases piled into the compartment and noisily seated himself by the window across from her and began flirting with her. The girl began to sob. Had she lost her marketable appearance so quickly that some freak thought it possible to compliment her and invite her to the dining car? 3 men finally extracted the cars from the trap. Closer to the highway, cell phones came to life. The boys saw a bunch of messages and calls. You know, Dad, I rushed into proposing to Alice. She never once told me she loved me, and I didn't really know how I felt either. In fact, I think I'm too young to get married. I'm only 22, but what's my hurry? Dad, are you home? I've got news. I'm getting married. It had been a week since the last conversation about marriage. The father came out to his son in bewilderment. Who said it was too early for him to get married? Daddy, you have no idea what she is beautiful, smart, kind, understands me in half a word. And how much she knows. She's so interesting. Are you talking about Vera? Of course I'll introduce you to her tomorrow. I hope I won't have to disguise myself as a tramp to see if money has attracted her to you. But Dad, by the way, it's the money. I loaned her some last year, and all this time she's been wanting to give it to me. Andrew and Helen's experience with their daughter helped them look at each other and their relationship in a new way. They both realize that each one is still interesting and dear to the other, and that they are family. The girl asked them not to go anywhere because she was preparing a surprise for them. On the threshold stood a smiling Alice and Sergio. He was carrying a huge bouquet of roses. Everything became clear without words. I asked for your daughter's hand in marriage, he said seriously. We are glad, said Andrew. If she doesn't mind, of course, Helen added. I don't mind. I'm very much in favor of it. A month later, they had a double wedding. They decided to combine the registration ceremony with a banquet, and therefore they chose a beautiful house for the occasion. Both brides were dizzy with happiness, and they fooled around posing, helping photographers to catch the most beautiful moments of the holiday. For all the newlyweds, the ceremony was their first, and they dreamed it would be their only one. Numerous guests also felt the incredible energy of the moment, because the young people generously shared their emotions with them.